conflict. Your fate will depend on your actions. War crimes will be prosecuted. War criminals will be punished. And it will be no defense to say, I was just following orders.
It is of particular significance that the culminating session of the World Tribunal on Iraq is being held here in Turkey, where the United States used Turkish air bases to launch numerous bombing missions to degrade Iraq's defenses before the March 2003 invasion, and has sought and continues to seek political support from the Turkish government, which it regards as an ally. All this was done in the face of enormous popular opposition by the Turkish people. The jury of conscience at this tribunal is not here to deliver a simple verdict of guilty or not guilty against the United States and its allies. We are here to examine a vast spectrum of evidence about the motivations and consequences of the US invasion and occupation, evidence that has deliberately been marginalized or suppressed. Every aspect of the war will be examined: its legality, the role of international institutions and major corporations in the occupation, the role of the media, the impact of weapons such as depleted uranium munitions, napalm and cluster bombs, the use of and legitimation of torture, the ecological impacts of the war, the responsibility of Arab governments, the impact of Iraq's occupation on Palestine, and the history of US and British military interventions in Iraq. Before the testimonies begin, I would like to briefly address, as straightforwardly as I can, a few questions that have been raised about this tribunal. The first is that the tribunal is a kangaroo court, that it represents only one point of view, that it is a prosecution without a defense, and that the verdict is a foregone conclusion. Now this view seems to suggest a touching concern that in this harsh world, the views of the US government and the so-called coalition of the willing, headed by President George Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair, have somehow gone unrepresented. That the World Tribunal, that the World Tribunal on Iraq isn't aware of the arguments in support of the war and is unwilling to consider the point of view of the invaders. If in the era of multinational corporate media and embedded journalism, anybody can seriously hold this view, then we truly do live in the age of irony, when satire has become meaningless because real life is more satirical than satire can ever be. Let me say categorically that this tribunal is the defense. It is an act of resistance in itself. It is a defense mounted against one of the most cowardly wars ever fought in history, a war in which international institutions were used to force a country to disarm and then stood by while it was attacked with a greater array of weapons than has ever been used in the history of war. Second, this tribunal is not in any way a defense of Saddam Hussein. His crimes against Iraqis, Kurds, Iranians, Kuwaitis, and others cannot be written off in the process of bringing to light Iraq's more recent and still unfolding tragedy. However, we must not forget that when Saddam Hussein was committing his worst crimes, the US government was supporting him politically and materially. When he was gassing Kurdish people, the US government financed him, armed him, and stood by silently. Saddam Hussein is being tried as a war criminal even as we speak. But what about those who helped to install him in power, who armed him and supported him, and who are now setting up a tribunal to try him and absolve themselves completely? And what about the other friends of the United States in the region that have suppressed Kurdish people's and other people's rights, including the government of Turkey? There are remarkable people gathered here